Welcome to Below the Line, where we talk about working in Hollywood from the crew perspective. My name is Skid. I'm a former assistant director and your host. Today, our focus is again on COVID-19 and how film production is managing through the pandemic. My guests are assistant directors who are, when all is said and done, responsible for delivering the day's work on set. Emily Hogan, welcome to Below the Line.
Hi, Skid. Thanks for having me back.
Glad to have you. Also returning is Della. Welcome.
How you doing, Skid? Nice to see you.
You as well. And then finally, Vince Duque. Welcome back.
Hey, Skid. Good to be back.
So for context, let's start with reviewing what each of you have been up to for the last 9 months. Emily, why don't you kick us off?
So about 9 months ago, I was still on Mythic Quest. We had just done our quarantine episode via Zoom, and then we returned back to work in August. Just finished out that season and have now just begun a new show for HBO Max called The Sex Lives of College Girls.
Well, I'm sure there's more we're going to talk about there, but let's go around the table. Chris, what have you been up to?
I was, since I was on a pilot when COVID started, and then in August, I started an HBO Max show called Generations, and I'm finishing that on Monday.
Thanks, Chris. Vince, how have you spent the pandemic?
I've been really pivoting into more independent producing. I did a couple commercials as an AD. I've been really just I didn't want to AD during the COVID situation because I knew it was going to be such a massive burden that I wasn't really prepared to deal with.
Well, there's a lot to talk about there. And Vince, appreciate having your point of view as far as how things have been working in the indie world versus the studio world. And we can discuss that as a group. Let's start by talking about the role of the COVID team. As frequent listeners to the show know, they've built up these teams that are responsible for all things COVID, but different studios and different productions and different shows are implementing these guidelines in different ways. Tell me about what you've seen as far as COVID teams go on the shows you've worked during the pandemic.
I can jump in. Having had 2 different COVID teams now, it's actually really interesting how different studios kind of treat the COVID team and the rules and everything. On Mythic Quest, which is Lionsgate show, our COVID team, they actually have a company called CETA. Lionsgate has hired to do all of their shows. And so they have one of their doctors, scientists leading the COVID department. We had a guy who specialized in airflow and how particles travel through air as the head of our department there. And then they helped us guide and shape our policy on set to try to make it as safe as possible. On Warner Brothers, which is HBO Max, they kind of, Chris, I don't know, I'm assuming Warner Brothers is overall on yours as well.
Yeah.
The COVID department, we actually have a charge nurse leading the COVID department, which is just a very different, obviously, medical position, although they are also medically inclined. And then we had an AD for the pilot, and we've transitioned into just another COVID person for the main show. But they've been very active in trying to kind of help guide our set policy in terms of how many people can be there, what is actually safe, what is the risk we're willing to take in order to make our days and to make things as efficient as possible while yet still trying to provide a safe work environment, keeping 6 feet apart and keeping people safe with hand washing and everything else. But both departments that I worked with, both COVID departments, although they were formed slightly differently, have been working very intensely with both myself, the AD department, and all the other departments to try to figure out the best way to work efficiently, but also keep us safe in this very much changing COVID environment.
So Chris, as you mentioned, also working on a Warner Brothers show for HBO, did you see similar play out of your COVID team, or was your experience different?
I mean, I've just kind of had one big experience of the whole thing, which kind of evolved into, we've kind of made it, we kind of just figured it out as we kind of went, but it started out really hectic for us. And I have a lady now, Beverly Ward. She's like a specialist in contact tracing and virus control, and she's kind of our head lady, and she really is kind of like mastered the fact that if we double mask and shield, then we're pretty much are invincible to this. I mean, once we did that, the 6 foot distancing didn't really, that was, one of our biggest problems was the 6 foot challenge for everybody on the crew. I mean, that was a constant, people telling people, we had like poles to keep people apart. But once we figured that out, once we had the double mask and the shield, everything really just got everybody could just work again. But at first it was really difficult. I mean, we really struggled. I mean, I didn't realize that I was going to actually be in charge of the whole thing. I thought I would just be like, somebody would like kind of inform me, this is your spots, this is how you do it. When you're on the set, somebody would be kind of helping, but I was in charge of keeping people alive. It was like Vince said, the challenge and the burden of that hit me pretty hard, and I'm trying to AD, and then I'm also trying to like do that. And it got to the point that it didn't matter what position or who you were. If your COVID compliance wasn't up to what my standard was of my set, then you weren't allowed on the set. And unfortunately, the DP and the director and the script supervisor fell short of that. They thought their jobs were beyond COVID compliance. So, I mean, short of getting fired, I really put my foot down and kept them off the set unless they had their stuff on. But then after a while, everybody just kind of got into it. And I kind of acquired 2 of the COVID compliance kids on the set to kind of come and be my 2, people that kind of like wiped everything down, timed when I'm in a room to when I have to exit, kept my air filters flow, kept my air purifiers in there and out, fans, kept the doors open, windows, did all that. Once I got them on my team, we were pretty tight. We got real tight. We got real good. And over the 6 months, we only shut down because we had a B operator that tested, or his quick tested positive, but he tested negative for 4 days straight when we went back to work. But we really never really had to stop for the 6 months. Everybody was, pretty much shutting down, but we managed to keep it together. And that was because, enforcing the wiping, the cleaning. We have the sprayers come in, we have the time, each set required a different time, who was in it. I also devised this thing where there was pretty much 12 people that were around the actors the whole time. It was the 2 A and B cameras, the boom guys, the dolly grips, myself, the still man. There's about 12 of us that always were there. So we had these like gold tags on our badges that were like, and then anybody that in that scene that had to be added to that group once the actors took their mask off, we'd mark them down. And then on the production part, we would see in this scene, these people were by the actors and that. So our contact tracing was really accurate if we needed it. So otherwise it just kind of fell into place after months of doing it. People kind of just fell into it, but it was really tough at first. I was really, really disappointed in the whole process.
Chris, I want to, before we sort of expand the scope of what we're talking about, something you brought up, going back to the early days. I remember sitting in the conversations with ADs at the Zoom meetings and such, where there was a big fear that ADs would end up being responsible for COVID on top of the AD job, which is already a full-time job to get the production done. And the idea of the COVID teams was to have that responsibility sit in an actual separate department. They did start to say you could hire ADs for that in those positions, and the DGA agreed to let ADs do the work, but it was still supposed to be separate. But it sounds like either your first show didn't come together well with that team, or something broke down in that intent. In general, open it up. What did everybody think about the sort of development between AD responsibilities and COVID team responsibilities?
Well, I mean, I think I just, without naming names, my head of the set, my head person on set for COVID was, kind of passive, and she didn't really want to take charge and tell me, hey, you've only got 10 minutes, you've got to step the whole room out, and while we spray down. And she didn't want to stop the production end of it. And I said, you have to, I'm an AD, I want to make my day, but I also need to I had to just realize that it's up to me to really, at first, to keep people from getting sick. And it was all about that. And I had to put AD second. Until I could really get a grasp on it, I had to put my ADism second, which was really a bummer. It never, they kept saying, we're going to get somebody to help you. But they never did. And And then I realized it was up to us.
Chris, I have a question. Did you feel that you had to pound them for them to buy in, that you had to take charge, or how did that play out for you in terms of the producers?
Well, I mean, you and Skid kind of know my personality, and Emily, I get hot sometimes, and I was really upset about this whole process, knowing that if I ignored it, people could die. I mean, I didn't know. I mean, how serious it could be, and it was scary. It scared the shit out of me. It scared the heck out of me, and so once I got the contact thing down, and I kept visually track of who was actually by the actors when the masks came off. And I mean, my script supervisor literally took it all the way to the studio because he felt he should be able to walk in while their masks were off. I said, "Could you just wait 10 seconds for them to put them on?" He thought I was impeding his work by holding him back 10 seconds. I mean, those were the arguments that I had with people just to do my job. It was ridiculous. Now he just got it. He gets it now. And we just had to kind of get it. It's like, your ego's got to just sit down and like, let COVID happen or we're not going to have a job. But it was really tough for me. And I was on my heels, for the first week. I really was, just also dealing with just the pressure of trying to get the show off the ground, and nobody had worked for 5 months, and everybody was tired, and nobody really, the camera guys were all out of shape. Everybody was kind of at their wits. We're trying to do 10-hour days, which turned into 12. I mean, I could expand more about the way we did it, but just one last thing about when we get to background talking about, we had a really good system for the background, which enabled us to have up to 100 people at a time, because we would color code their masks and keep them in pods so they would never cross each other's paths. And we'd test them all 4 times before they got to us. So we spent a lot of money in testing. I don't know if you did that for your HBO Max, but we did a lot of testing. And we caught a lot of people in their cars before they got to us. Probably 25 people tested positive in their cars in our parking lot before they even got to us. So we stopped a lot of problems.
I want to talk more about the challenges all of you faced on set. Emily, your team, was it similar to what Chris said? Did you have those challenges at the beginning, or you started with that Lionsgate team and then moved over to the Warner Brothers team?
Yeah, so we had a couple different Mythic Quest again was one of the first shows to get back up and running, and I was doing a lot of talking with other ADs who were also kind of trying to get their shows up, because we were trying to create a whole new set of protocols, as Chris was kind of discussing, about how to be safe. And although the COVID team was there to help and guide it, they were scientists. They don't know anything about film production. So trying to explain to them about how cameras work and why in certain scenarios, you just can't keep 6 feet apart. The dolly grip, if they're operating the dolly, cannot be 6 feet from the operator while they're operating. It just doesn't work that way. So unless you're going to reinvent, which some shows have, like All Rise, I know, has like 20 cameras that they use that are all like remote operated to get their shots. It's a different way. They just recreated the way of filming. But for us, we were trying to stick with the style of the show as it was pre-COVID. And so we had those challenges. I also ran into, I loved my supervisor, but again, CETA, which is a company that works with a lot of these big corporations, they have this dual role. One is they want to keep everybody safe. That's their job as the COVID department, to keep the crew and the cast and everybody safe. But they're also people pleasers in terms of the company, is that they want to keep the production going. They want us to be able to complete our production, and that's part of their job too. And so our supervisor was lovely, but I was always having these arguments with him, saying like, listen, I'm the first AD. I want to make my day. I'm going to push you to the limit in terms of trying to figure out a way to get my shot and trying to get it. But I need you, who is the expert, to tell me this is not safe, because I don't know. So unless you are telling me, you're going to have to tell me, Emily, that's too far. No, that's not safe. And I have to be able to trust you with that. Otherwise, I can't keep my crew safe. And so that was kind of a constant back and forth, because I felt like, again, he would always try to make it work, which is wonderful in a normal world. But again, I don't want anybody to die. So that was kind of a constant battle for us. We had a COVID AD, Rebecca Shriver, who was just absolutely amazing. And without having her there to help train our COVID folk about testing and production and who did and what days they needed to be tested, and just helping us out with that. Just even the logistical stuff of this is how you set up on location. You need these tents, you need these things. We never would have made any of our days. I mean, she was absolutely integral to have. And I don't know how we would have done it without her. And she also was kind of the moral compass over in the COVID area, because again, she was seeing on the ground, and she would alert us to when she felt like there were decisions that she wasn't sure were coming from the right place, so that we could address them. And again, that I know my entire crew felt so much better having her there. And even as I went on to my next show, people were like, can we take Rebecca with us? So that kind of was a piece. And, we went through this whole process of starting at me talking to the DP and trying to figure out how we could take turns on set and everything else. And we actually had a couple rehearsal days before we started shooting, which was huge in terms of trying to figure out the process, where we had our COVID supervisor watching set, seeing how it runs, and trying to kind of give us an idea of when was safe. And kind of what we started with is, okay, this is the baseline of safety. This is where, this is safe. And then how can we make it safer? What are the extra layers on top of it in terms of the onion to try to make it as safe as possible in order to work the way we need to work, but be as safe about it as possible? And it was interesting because when we started, obviously COVID was in a different place and there was different CDC guidelines. So when we started, it was 15 minutes at a time with somebody who was positive, in order to be considered a close contact. And that kind of guided how we had done it. And actually back in August, I don't know if you guys remember, COVID was still fairly spread out through the community. It was not as prevalent as now. And so that was really informing our guidelines. And originally we were able to, with our health and safety officer, we were all masked. We had these very specific rules about, who could be on set. Again, like Chris was saying, with when the actors had their masks off, and we had different zones. So when we were red, only people who were being tested 3 times a week could be there because the actors would be coming in and out. And then we had our green zone, which was basically any of the crew could come in, but we had to do a 10-minute cool down in between when green and red were there. And so all these protocols in place. And that seemed to be working great. We actually went halfway through our season without one case on set. We had a couple cases coming in that from the outside that we were able to contain, didn't have to shut down. And then November rolled around and everything changed, because between August and November, not only did the CDC guidelines change about now it's no longer 15 minutes in the presence of somebody, it's total time elapsed. So 15 minutes over the course of 24 hours. And we had all these new variants coming in that at the time we weren't aware of. But we went very quickly from being able to work with masks and face shields and just with what we had set up, that we were almost working like normal. In terms of time, we were doing 10-hour days, which was great just because we were pretty much at that point keeping 6 feet when we could, but our sets were big enough that we were able to have grip and electric working at the same time, while our cameras were spread out enough that they could be dialing in their shots while everything was happening. To by December, basically face shields down all the time, limitations on the room in terms of having only 2 or 3 people being able to work at any given time to be safe. And it was really interesting to kind of see the evolution of it. And I really needed at the end our COVID people to step up and say, you got too many people in the room. Because as Chris pointed out, you're doing too many other things. And I was very fortunate, again, to have a department, after we had several discussions, to say, no, you need to come in and tell us when people are too close. You need to be the ones, because I'm trying to keep the crew safe, but I'm not necessarily watching everybody. And they were very good at doing that. When I moved over to Warner Brothers, to this HBO Max show, it was a whole different set of COVID rules. And it's just really interesting because I spent basically 6.5 months working in one way. And then in January, I had to shift to a totally different system, totally different way of working. And interestingly enough, the COVID department On the pilot, so I was not supposed to do the pilot. Actually, there was another AD who had prepped it, uh, and was taken out halfway through the pilot because of a case on set and was quarantined. So halfway through our pilot, they called me because I was supposed to be the alternating AD to come in and try to finish it. The DP got taken out in that quarantine as well, along with the gaffer and the key grip. So they basically halfway through the pilot had to bring in a whole new group of people. And I hadn't been a part at all at developing those COVID guidelines and what they had set up on this show. So that was really interesting to kind of walk into a situation where I had absolutely no control over what had been previously set up. We were doing a lot of testing. They had all that testing cadence set up in terms of testing background 4 days out. The crew who was in A zone was getting tested daily. And this was in the height of the pandemic. They were shooting this mid-January, but they hadn't really done the day of rehearsal, I think, in order to see what protocols were working and what wasn't. And I think that really had an effect on, they didn't have that time to figure out, they didn't have the luxury of figuring out, okay, what works and what doesn't work. And so it was a kind of a constant battle throughout the whole pilot, trying to figure out, number one, how to make our days. It was a pilot. So you have all the regular pilot stuff of just trying to figure out what the tone is, new actors, new crew, new everything. And it just made it incredibly difficult because there was this kind of shifting guidance as everybody was trying to stay safe and trying to figure out how to be safe while doing it, while making a pilot. And again, I was kind of thrown into the mix and just trying to figure out what they had set up and how to do that. And Rick Page came in to take over as the DP, and he is amazing and just very, very, very COVID aware, and really was able to, I think, help bring a lot of structure to our show because he demanded from his crew that they be COVID safe. So he was a huge kind of help in that way, where our COVID department wasn't quite there in terms of making sure people were staying 6 feet apart and hadn't set up, room occupancy and everything. But just between myself and him and us being able to just say, this is how we're doing it, to be able to keep people safe. And we started rotating through. We have very small sets, and fortunately, we were able to finish the pilot without another incident. But it's really interesting because, again, every show, every studio has a different way of going, and every show has different needs. So you kind of have to work it out and see what works for your show and what works for the environment that you're in, to kind of make it flow.
I feel like if you get the camera department on board, it's a long way towards getting your whole crew on board, since they often, even pre-COVID, see themselves, for good reason, as somewhat in a separate sort of bubble for the work they have to do. We've talked about studio work, and we'll come back to it, and I'll share some of my experiences, studio, non-studio. But Vince, open up our perspective a little bit here. Talk about your experiences outside the studio system.
Well, first I wanted to talk about why I was really reluctant to come in back to the studio system. My girlfriend has autoimmune disease, and I was really concerned about wanting to protect her and keeping her safe. And I'd been, just listening to the Zoom AD podcast or the Zoom AD meetings. People were going back to work, and I was, hearing stuff from Chris. I was hearing stuff from second ADs. I was hearing stuff from production coordinators in Chicago. I was hearing stuff from you. And I had visited a set, and I was just gathering this idea that, the COVID compliance officer was essentially, to me, like the intimacy officer, like somebody who just got a degree from Johns Hopkins for like a Zoom class, and then all of a sudden is the compliance officer. And I felt I just didn't want to deal with a lot of the burden of the situation. It was, to me, like getting people to wear their safety vests, right? I mean, it's a pain in the ass to get them to wear their safety vests on location. So I was thinking, what about COVID? Having to be that person. And I don't know, it's, like Chris is such a great AD in that he's got such a great presence. And I feel like when I get into situations where I want to put my foot down and get into, like do the right thing and have a moral compass, something about it, I just, don't seem to have the same kind of rapport I need to with producers. And I just didn't want to get into those battles. And so I kind of wanted to wait in the wings. And then I got into a couple of independent producing situations, and it was a crapshoot. We didn't have a compliance officer. I looked at the guidelines, the industry guidelines, that they put out. So I was using that as kind of a reference point. But we had people tested, but it was really informal. But they were mostly younger, right? Younger folks, probably mid-20s and 30s, and much more conscientious. I felt like. Whereas in the studio system, I felt like, there's certain departments I feel have a kind of like a political leaning potentially, that they might like not really regard COVID as something really serious. And, you can't control stuff when they go home and do whatever they do. And I just didn't want to deal with that. But in the independent situation, I've done 5 independent projects, and they've been great. Nobody's gotten COVID. We would do the temperature checking and have everybody tested, but it was really mostly for contact tracing rather than preventing the COVID. But I was really good about keeping everybody 6 foot apart. Everybody had their masks on, and we've never had any problems. I did a commercial, and the producers were really good about doing the testing, and then the testing on the day. And we never had any problems there. So, we had probably had like 50 background on the day, and everybody was really conscientious. That happened in San Diego. So, and San Diego is a town, especially partly in La Jolla, where people just in general weren't wearing a lot of masks around. But in the production, we were very conscientious. And, this just happened a month and a half ago. So I think people were really in tune with doing all the COVID protection. But I haven't had any problems, but I can imagine just listening to Emily's stories and Chris's stories. I'm like, man, I just don't want, I wouldn't want to be in that situation, just having to bear all that burden,
Yeah.
It's understandable. I think when I started on Red Notice with Netflix, there weren't a lot of shows going on, and I did have production background, but was not working in AD capacity. And I worked for the production. And I think this is I'm curious about the experiences. Vince, what I would draw from yours is that as a producer, you can set the bar of how things are going to be handled on set. And with a small group of people who are all conscientious, you can build a team that can stay safe from COVID. On Netflix, we didn't know a lot when we were starting up, and I built the team from scratch. I was able to hire folks as additional seconds to round out the teams, and we sort of built it combination of military and film approach. And we had Netflix safety, but we all worked for the production. I hired our CCO, he worked for me, and we were partners in sort of putting these things in effect. When I went to the Warner Brothers show, Legacies, Warner Brothers hired, and I think, Emily, you suggested something similar. Chris, I'm not sure on your side, but they hired nurses, and those folks did not report up through production. They reported directly to Warner Brothers, who had set up their own sort of structure. And at least on my show, I found the chain of command a little muddier because they clearly did not have set experience, but I was building up the set team. It was smaller, of course, it's TV and budget and such, but it wasn't always clear where the balance and the authority was on that same experience. And so some tension there that, Vince, I think you almost avoid by not having a studio. Now, Netflix might have changed their approach by now, and everything was growing over the course of the 6 months that I was working down in Atlanta in different ways. But I noticed a very big shift, and that relationship is really important, that production, studio, and where the COVID team falls in that can make a big difference.
Absolutely. I mean, again, my understanding from the AD who started the pilot is that she felt like she wasn't necessarily getting what she needed from the COVID team, and that because it was such a separate entity, that she wasn't able to put in place the restrictions and really have those conversations that needed to be happening in order to keep everybody safe. And then she also had the pressure from above in terms of making their days. And because when they were doing what she felt like they needed to do to be safe, they said, no, you need to go faster. You need to figure out a better way. And so she was really stuck between this rock and a hard place. Again, because she wasn't getting the support she needed from the COVID team. It wasn't set up in the way that she felt could work. And we kind of had a whole reimagining after the pilot. And we've started production now on the series. And I feel like, unfortunately, because of that, but thankfully, due to her help and kind of pointing out those holes, we were able to get to a better place with our COVID department. And because it's in such a separate world, it's the Warner Brothers chain of command, as you said, Skid, that we were able to kind of bring it together and give them more control over set and give them more power to help me and help the crew keep us safe. So unfortunately, I think in the pilot, they had to go through that tough period where we saw things really weren't working the way they were set up to get us to a place where now I feel like we're in a much stronger place where the COVID team has much more power than they did necessarily in the pilot to help keep production safe.
I wanted to emphasize to Emily's point, that's exactly what I was really paranoid about. And, you know, Chris, you've been working this producing team for a while now, right? So you have a great rapport.
Yeah.
I feel like, you know, in the stuff that I was doing, I've been doing a lot of alternative comedy, you know, for, Adult Swim, FX. I'm bouncing around different producing teams who are younger, not as experienced, and I feel like they don't necessarily have the same appreciation for how the ADs run the teams the way older producing teams do. And I just
Right.
I just didn't want to deal with having that burden, as Emily kind of talked about with your friend on the pilot. You know, that's just like what the pressure of having to make your days
Right.
right, and then also deal with the code when you wanted to be safe. I always feel safety is something that we all talk about. We're the safety officers, but you know, in my years of studio production, I always feel like, oh, it's safety to protect the studio from liability as opposed to safety to really protect the
Yeah.
crew, right?
I mean, you know, Emily brought up a good point. It's like once I got my COVID team, once I empowered them and once I said, it's okay, you can say this, you know, take charge. I mean, my Paul Marks and Blair Skinner, our producer and production managers, they really set me up, and Christy Frankenheimer, our COVID compliance officers, they really set us up really good. I mean, all the tents, all the stuff, we really had great vision of all that. They just didn't have like, you know, most of the people on my COVID team came from like locations, security, craft service. You know, they weren't like the kind of like go take charge, you know, like step above everybody and say go do this. And they just didn't have the guts to kind of do it. And once I kind of empowered these two kids on the set with just making sure we squirting our hands with the stuff and wiping everything down, and one kid watched the cast what they touched, and one kid watched the crew what they touched, and once I let them kind of do that and let them have control of like make sure everybody's got their shield down and all this kind of stuff. I mean, in November we went to all N95 and most of us double masked after that, and then we all shielded in the red zone regardless if the actors had their mask on or not. We gave up the 6 foot. We just did, because once we realized if you double mask and shield, you're pretty much, the 6 foot's really not, I mean, it's there and it's a great thing, but that's for like if you're not have anything on, you know. So that made us work more efficiently as well. But they gave us another day to do our shows. They gave us COVID time. They gave us extra time. So I never felt pressure like, and if I ever felt like they're gonna like, I'm not gonna make my day because of COVID, then that's the way it is, because we're being safe first. And they never pressured me about that, because I made it clear to them that what's important. And that, but I've been with my guys, I don't know, Emily, I've been with the two producers and director that I've been with them a couple of years now. And so they would hope that I took care of the crew like that. And they would hope that I stood for them, because, they're very, they're humanitarians as well too. And they don't want anybody, for God's sake, will take a little more time to do it. But I have to say, I'm really proud of how I kind of evolved as a COVID person, and just like, I took care of my people on set, and I feel like I really did a good job with that, and nobody got sick when I was out there. And the fact that we kind of like, what my producers set me up with, and that all the stuff that we had available for us, we had plenty of, PPE, we had plenty of stuff for everybody. Any kind of, you want a certain kind of shield, we'll buy it for you. You want a certain kind, anything we'll do. All that stuff was like available, tons of stuff we have. and the testing, we have 8 testing machines, and that helped us out with like getting things done. But, it really helped having that support. I mean, I just had to put it kind of like, turn it on, really. I just had to like get it really revved up. And then now it's like I walk on set and Molly's like, okay, you have an hour in this set, or you have 45 minutes. And she counts it down. Everybody goes in and out. The other day I had 100 people on the set at this bar. We would get everybody in and out and spray the place down and everything. In like 12 minutes it took me to get everybody out, spray it, set it, and then come back in. I mean, everybody knew that that's part of the day, you know what I mean? So, but I can't wait for it to be over, I have to say. My ears, my face, I'm just done with it all, and ready to just not have COVID as a tool on my set, really,
That might be a wow, Chris. Yeah, that's we're all struggling with that, but
no, I want to say that I've been very fortunate that all my producers have also been incredibly, incredibly supportive. Bonnie Muniz, who's my line producer on Sex Lives of College Girls, it's a constant conversation we're having about how we can keep people safe, how we can and she's been great about, making sure that our COVID department, it does have the capability, and we are doing what we need to do to keep people safe, and that everybody's got the appropriate PPE. And it's never been a fight about that. That's never been a thing. And Chip Busovich, who was on Mythic Quest, again, any department needed, whatever we needed to do to keep the crew safe, that was always of the utmost priority as we were trying to figure out how to make it work. It was just, how we find the best way, as Chris said, to be safe and make our days, and do what we need to do. So
well, are you with Chip right now? I work with Chip, and he's a wonderful producer, and he's definitely going to take care of everybody. That guy's great, really great producer. Really
yeah,
great.
no, it was amazing that he was with us for that whole ride on Mythic Quest last year, and definitely having that type of person there to support you, it made the entire difference.
Yeah, it does. I mean, people have to care for people. Yeah.
I think one of the challenges is that so many shows did go back to production very, very quickly. Not saying that it's unsafe or disaster, but I think it made it harder than it needed to be because the COVID expertise was not widespread. We talked about the little things that it takes to build an effective COVID team, but it wasn't like they were, sitting in the wings waiting for something like this to happen. It really had to build from scratch. But so many shows, I think, in the studios particularly, were afraid of not having material when there was such demand for new programs and such, that there was just a lot of pressure to stand up really quickly, and that those relationships had to evolve. I think it points to your early troubles, Chris. I think the challenges of figuring out from the beginning. Do you guys think that's settled down? I think I project that we're probably talking the rest of the year, the calendar year for sure, if not into 2022, that we're going to be dealing with this.
Yeah. I mean, it's a bummer that we have to keep playing along, but I've utmost confidence now that I can, with just a few simple things, really. And obviously everybody overthought it at first because we just didn't know how far to take it. But once we double mask and shield all the time, it's like, there's just a few things that you have to really keep an eye on, and you can really get things done. I mean, you really could film. Our show, you would never know that it was filmed in COVID. We have, hugging, kissing, everything's happening in our show. It's like, I say it's like a period show because we're, 2019, it's like a period piece because there's nothing COVID at all. And then you see shows on TV that are like, everybody's, acting with masks on, and it's just odd. I don't know.
Well, let's talk about some of the specific AD challenges that have been affected by the presence of COVID. Chris, you started to talk earlier about the system you set up for background. Lots of testing, but say more about the color coding of folks actually on set. And again, how you managed to plan for 100 people on set in these times.
Well, I do a high school, drama. So we're at Pasadena High School. It's a very large quad, and, 35, 40 people it's not going to cut it for us. So Christy Frankenheimer, our COVID compliance coordinator, she can devise this thing that we do blocks of 10. Background has a different color mask on, so we can see all the blocks clearly when they have their masks on. And then we pod them into sections that they don't cross other pods. and then we have one section that walks between them but doesn't connect with them. I mean, Abron, my second who's on set, rocks with this, but you know, he keeps everybody separate. But and then so nobody interacts. So really, our pods are much smaller, even though we have 100. Really, we just have pods of 10, so nobody interacts. I mean, you just have to kind of get the lines close. But we've managed to look like our quad is full, and we keep people separated. And then, you know, it's just a matter of just keeping them separated. Beyond that, we do keep, you know, all the background 6 feet when we, you know, do that. And when I say, you know, like on everybody, it's a set, you know, in the hot zone, I'll say going hot, please take your masks off. When that happens, within 25 feet of the actors, this is one of the things that I've devised, that no background talks. Doesn't even pan. I don't want any kind of breath coming out of their mouth by our actors. And you don't really notice that. You're not going to notice if an extra's not talking, but it just kind of keeps the breath around them clear as well too. And then, you know, once we say, you know, cut, everybody's put their mask back on, we could clearly see they're all in their pods. But they eat lunch in their pods, they get ready in their pods. And that really helped us get more people out there.
You bring up another point with actors, and I like anybody can weigh in on this, but a lot of the protocols are designed, I think it's fair to say, the first priority being the actors, not only because you lose an actor, you get shut down, but also because they're at the most risk, masks off, interacting with each other in that space. However, given the history of Hollywood and the production that we do, actors are also the folks who often think the rules don't apply to them. And I'm wondering if you guys see those kind of tensions, or is actors' concern for their safety outweigh the sort of, I don't need a mask, or I don't need to show up early, or I don't need to get tested 3 days. Anyway, the kind of objections that under normal circumstances, the production would accommodate the actor as best they could. This is a little tighter though, because we're talking about COVID.
I was fortunate. Our number one actress, Martha Plimpton, was one of the people that was tested. I mean, got a vaccine done at an early time when she was like, they were just testing it. So she had a vaccine already. And all the kids that we have, the 7 ensemble, they're scared to death of COVID, and they keep in their little bubble. So I was really lucky with that. And everybody, I mean, they loved the fact that we took great care of them on the set. They really loved that. I didn't have any trouble at all.
You know, I have had some interesting issues hiring actors on my independent stuff, because we would get an actor that, let's say, for example, we needed on Tuesday, but then he was going to be working on a Netflix show on Thursday. And then I couldn't hire him because he had to go get tested for that show. And then I was going to reschedule him to do another day, but he was also going to do a Warner Brothers show, and they weren't accepting the testing for the Netflix show. So I thought that was interesting. And it was like, I couldn't even imagine having to deal with the 3-day spacing to deal with actors. And, you know, there was another situation on the show that I was going to come back to, Dave, the FX comedy. I knew that it was going to be a shit show, and they shut down for COVID twice. One of them because of an actor. He had gone to a party, and, you know, they saw that he went to a party, and they saw him on an Instagram story, and he came back. Nobody said anything, but it was like, yeah, you can't control those guys. You know, it was a show about rappers, so it was just I just didn't want to come back to that kind of thing. So.
On Mythic Quest, we were very fortunate, again, as we're coming back at the beginning of the pandemic, and it really is like a family over there. We were in a second season, which I think helps a lot too, but our cast was very, very, very concerned about COVID, and Rob McElhenney, who's our showrunner, who also acts on the show, again, that was a high top priority for him. They rewrote a lot of the scripts in order to keep everybody safer. We had some big background scenes that he put outside to keep us safe. They were originally inside. He put them exterior, and or he really had the writers reduce anything that we needed to in terms of that would have had that background that would have put our actors greater at risk. But Murray Abraham, who is in his late 70s, early 80s, is one of our actors. So obviously we had that as a concern, trying to keep him safe, especially as he's in the super high risk category. But our actors were great. They were wonderful in terms of just really wanting to be safe, and they were very on board with testing and just making sure that they were doing everything that they could to keep safe. And again, like Chris said, they really appreciated all of our efforts in order to keep them that way. The new show I'm on has a lot of younger actors. And I think as the pandemic has gone on, I'm still learning them. They're all lovely ladies, but I think, again, some of them have different ideas of what is safe. And of course, we haven't had a lot of those discussions, but just even on set, they're younger. And so they do things that they're not thinking about in terms of COVID safety. Like they're all from musical theater. And so they all like to come to set and sing. And I'm like, guys, no, we cannot sing on. I love singing. I would normally encourage that on a comedy, but we can't do that right now. So it's stuff like that where I don't think they're intentionally not trying to be safe, but it just doesn't occur to them because they're younger and they're not thinking it through. And that's not all of them. There's certain ones that are worse culprits than others, but it's definitely conversations that we've had to keep having with them about it, in terms of, hey guys, we're not only trying to keep you safe, but we're trying to keep our crew safe too. So I know this is inconvenient, but we need you to make a different acting choice, or we need you to, help us out here. So it's definitely a challenge. And I think, again, it just depends on who your actors are and where their headspace is at in terms of COVID and their understanding of the disease.
And where do you guys think we're going to go as far as the shorter days? I know one of the big pushes in the beginning, both with the additional work of the masks and just in general, shooting 10 hours, walking lunches, getting the day done, getting separate. But there was some talk that might even stick around. I'm already seeing that shift away. Very few shows are still doing that. What do you guys think the evolution is on the workday itself?
I mean, truly it is going to 10 hours. I mean, remember all the 16s, ridiculous, right? But it's about the DP really. I mean, if they don't give you extra time to do your COVID compliance, then, we've got 2 DPs on our show and they're both wonderful. And one loves to still light, put stands up light, bring lights into the rooms and light from the floor. I'm working with the guy that lights from the ceiling or just naturally. So we just fly along, sort of like 8 to 10 hour days. And then with the same crew, the other DPs, 10 to 12, 13 hour days. It really depends on that still. That's a big part of, at least for us in television, that's a huge part of your day is how fast is that guy and how, what cameras do you have and what can you get away with? I don't slow down. COVID really right now does not manage my day at all. We've got that under control. It's basically just back to what everybody deals with. And that's how much you want to, set up each shot and how long you want to take to set it up.
On our shows, yeah, I think part of it depends on the DP, and it also depends on the sets you're working with. On Mythic Quest, we had our bullpen is huge, it's large. We were dealing with a core background, which we've now instituted on Sex Lives with College Girls too, to try to keep our actors safe. And those are the only people allowed within 6 feet of them. They're on the same testing cadence as the crew. They're getting tested daily. They're part of our family, and we kind of keep hammering that home to try to keep everybody safe. But again, we were able to work a little bit more freely on Mythic Quest because of the size of our sets. Our sets on Sex Lives of College Girls are very small. It was something, Mindy Kaling's our other showrunner. We had built them bigger, but she felt it didn't work, that it felt wrong for the set. So our production designer redesigned them so that they're much smaller now. But obviously that makes it much more difficult to light in this environment and to be in there because our occupancy is 8 in a lot of them. Some of them are 4, some of them are 2. So in order to keep safe, again, Rick Page is fabulous, but he's kind of got his hands tied in terms of how many people we can put in there at any given time to light. Luckily, they've given us a couple extra days in our schedule so that we can adjust for that, which has been awesome. And it's definitely been a challenge in that sense in terms of, again, but Rick does a great job of we've figured out a flow. So we have these 3 different stages where first stage is the camera operators are in with our set dressers. We get the room set, we kick them out. Stage 2, we have Grip and Electric in there. They do their thing, taking turns or working as needed within the occupancy limits of the room. And then we kick them out. We bring camera back and our stand-ins in to do our final adjustments along with sound. So again, it's a longer process, which stretches out our day. We're trying to keep it to 10 or 11, but just because of the nature of the beast right now, it's been stretching out to 12. So again, I'm hoping that we can get back to the 10-hour, 11-hour, but kind of what I've seen, and even on Mythic Quest sometimes, we were stretching into the 12-hour pieces, just depending on COVID and how complicated the days were in order to make our days. So we'll see
Wow.
how it goes.
That's interesting that you still do we started like that where we let certain people into the room and then they'd have to clear out. We just stopped all that once we went to double masking and shielding. It just, I don't know, our lady said that it doesn't matter. Once you have that, you're about as secure as you can be. And so we, obviously we wipe everything down, but we stopped kind of like doing all that. And plus the DP that I have doesn't light. So it's like, there's only just like a camera rehearsal and we just start filming. But it's interesting that you still kind of hold that compliance in that direction. It's interesting like that.
Emily, is that a Warner Brothers thing, or is that?
I think it's more of, again, Rick is incredibly concerned, as I am, with safety, and it's the
Yeah.
size of our sets in terms of occupancy that's really, really informing that. On Mythic Quest, Chris, we were working much more like you were saying. And again, Sita, who was running that show, we had a lot of discussions and he came to set. Dr. Fung was great in terms of just, looking at the situation, calculating the airspace, how circulation was
Yeah.
happening, making sure everybody was masked appropriately, and saying, okay, again, like I said before, we had this safety level. This is where we are, and everything else was layers on top of that. And so
Yeah.
deciding when we could peel off the layers for efficiency so that we could get out in 10 hours. So on Mythic Quest, and again, our sets were a lot larger, we were able to, like you said, everybody was kind of working together in a normal way, but that was the determination made by our COVID department there.
Right. Same as
And
us, yeah.
yeah, and I think, again, we're still a little gun shy coming off the pilot where they were shooting right at the height of COVID in January when cases were the worst. And we had an unfortunate incident where a lot of our crew was taken out in quarantine because we were trying to work in the way that was more natural in terms of more people in the space. And the set was so small that you couldn't get the 6 feet in terms of the
Right.
contact tracing with 15 minutes of contact over the course of the day. I think now we're kind of gone to the far end of the spectrum in terms of making sure that never happens again, because Warner Brothers really, again, in terms of their COVID thing, they never
Right.
want more than 5 people taken out from
Yeah.
close contact from any case. So I think that's kind of been we went from them trying to work that way, which in terms of everybody working together to make the days go faster, to
Right.
kind of compensating the other way because of the size of the sets. So
Right. I wanted to also say one thing just to reiterate what Emily was saying. We also had a group of 20 kids that we tested the whole season that were the background around the actors all the time too, which made the actors feel much more comfortable, that knowing that we kind of took care of them in that respect too, that the flow around them was our regular folks. And I mean, all that stuff matters. It really does. I mean, and I would never knock, like if I went on to another show and they did it a different way, I'd say, oh no, you got to do it like this. I like whatever makes everybody happy and safe and feel comfortable. That's what's going to happen. I mean, whatever that is, I mean, whatever. We've gotten to a place since we never really tested positive out. We never positive out on the red, that we kind of got in this place because we've been doing it for 6 months together. So it's kind of refined it and took, slimmed it down a little bit. But I could see like starting up another show, and everything's different. And it is on how everybody feels about it too. You have to, I mean, I took the temperature of the crew every day about how's everything feeling. If you want to step out, if this isn't, enough time or too much time for you, let us know. And that, just showing that respect and showing that you care for everybody is a big part of it as well.
And she's saying check their temperature in the sense of checking their attitudes. Were you literally also
Yeah.
taking their temperature every day? Because that's been
Yeah,
on
you're
different
supposed
sets.
You're supposed to every day when you do your little thing in the morning, you take a temperature and you clock in, man. But no, I definitely would just, especially with my, the keys, we kind of talk, how's everybody doing? How we feeling? We're going to be in this room. We had 6 days we were at this place called Hamburger Joe's on Magnolia Avenue in Burbank, when we had 6 days where I had 100 people in there. And we decided every 45 minutes we're walking everybody out and we're spraying down. And then I made a big announcement. If anybody feels uncomfortable, please step out. We'll find a nice space for you. But you got to just let everybody know that we're there for you, and you just got to just, that's the big thing. Then everybody gets comfortable with it. But
I think that's one of the challenges of it, that it's not like shooting in space, where if you make a mistake, you're going to die, and it's going to be very obvious that you made the mistake. Because there's this sort of area of, did you catch COVID in that moment or not? Consequentially, attitudes and perception becomes a huge part of the equation for actually getting the work done, to your point, Chris.
Early on, we had a locker room scene where we kind of shut the windows up and put some smoke in there, atmosphere smoke. And, I knew better. And, that haunted me for like the 7 days we tested out of that. And nobody but I never let that happen again. And I never let the smoke, and I never let anybody kind of talk me. But that was my AD part that kind of like let that happen, instead of saying, no, we shouldn't shut the windows. And at the time, smoke was not a good thing. Now they realize that doesn't really matter, that we found out. But at the time it was like, no smoke, because that holds the virus in the air and carries it. But now we find out that the smoke that we use, the virus is heavier than the smoke that we use, so it doesn't really manage. But still, you got to just be careful.
What other evolutions have you guys seen over time, or extrapolating from that, where do you guys think it's going as far as the managing the set, or just sort of the set work in general?
I think as COVID cases go down, I'm hoping to return. I think the mask wearing is going to be a thing for at least the next year or two, just even if we're not doing the KN95s, even if it's just double masking or having some sort of face covering on. I think that's probably going to continue at least through 2022. I'm hopeful that as cases continue to go down and people are vaccinated, that people feel more comfortable and more confident in terms of maybe not having to wear the face shields all the time, because that's great, but it's also uncomfortable, and it affects the lighting, and it affects people being, operators being able to operate and everything else. So I'm hoping that, again, that ends up going away, and that people are just, as Chris was saying, a lot of it is kind of the temperature of the crew and how people are feeling and how people feel safe, because we've been dealing with trying to get a lot of background in small spaces as well. And so how we can accommodate the crew and make sure everybody's feeling good and comfortable and knows kind of, like, we rapid test all the background on days they work, especially on the big groups that aren't our core, again, just to give everybody that extra sense of safety. So I'm hoping that, as the year progresses and people are vaccinated, that we can get a little bit more back to normalcy in terms of just crew still staying safe, but just feeling more confident, more comfortable that the risk is very low, and that we can kind of get back to the general flow of how it was beforehand.
Well, here's hoping on that. At the very least, we'll be ready for the next pandemic, whatever virus.
Oh yeah,
next rears its ugly head. But
I'm ready.
Well, thanks everybody for hopping on today. It was great covering this with you guys. Good luck on your shows. Plan to come back and tell us about how things run. Good seeing everybody.
Thanks.
Listeners, thanks for sticking with us. If you've got feedback, I always welcome it. You can send email comments to skid, S-K-I-D, at belowtheline.biz. That's B-I-Z. Please rate us wherever you get your podcast. It helps us reach new listeners. And new listeners, I'd encourage you to peruse our past seasons, see if anything else sparks your interest. An easy way to do that is by visiting the website, belowtheline.biz. If you're on Facebook, you can find photos and other behind-the-scenes materials at Podcast Below the Line. And finally, you can follow the podcast on Twitter and Instagram. It's at Pod Below the Line. Thanks to Curtis Five for our music and John Wan for our logo. The logo is available on t-shirts, mugs, and stickers at redbubble.com. Once again, thanks for listening. Be safe out there.